What's up, dudes and dudettes? Normally this would be Gibby's world, but he took off. So it's Spicoli's world today, brah. Check out my wig, man. Like when I'm hanging 10 on the big curls, it doesn't even get wet, brah. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all this stuff, so like check it out, man. Like, am I supposed to do something? I don't know. He was working on a computer and he got mad and took off to go get something at like Radio Shack or something because we don't have a micro center in Florida because we suck, bruh. That's okay. We also don't have the big waves like they do in Hawaii. Hank 10, baby. Yeah. That's okay. It's lucky you got the Spicoli man here. I'm going to show you what to do with all these wires right now. I hope that was good because I ain't doing it again. What the heck is wrong with my chair? It's all messed up and sandy. Hey everybody, welcome back to Gibby's World. I don't know what's going on with my chair and stuff. I feel like somebody else was in here messing around. But today, what we're going to be talking about are cables and the power supply. We're starting to wind this series down, and I hope that I haven't overloaded you with information because you need room for a whole lot more. The cables can be one of the most intimidating parts of a build because before long, you have what looks like a rat's nest of cables. Something that looks like this is not uncommon, believe it or not. So what do you do with them? How do you manage them? And how do you make sure that everything is hooked together properly? Because you have electricity flowing through it. You don't want it shorting out on the case or on another component, getting caught in a fan. So you have to pay attention. That's the bottom line. And you have to be patient. Even for me, when I'm dealing with a compact case that has a lot of wires, I have to step back sometimes and take a second look at the way I'm doing things. Now, we're not going to go over cable management today. In fact, what we're going to be focused mostly on is actually connecting the cables to the visible side of the computer and making sure that looks good. And then in another episode, we're going to go over cable management. So for today, I want to talk about a few types of cables you're going to encounter. I want to show you what a power supply looks like when you open the box. And I'm going to show you a few little tricks that I use to help me manage the appearance of the cables in my case. All right, so first of all, you have to understand you're going to probably need adapters. And adapters can be any kind of an adapter. It can be something like this that I picked up. This is a USB 3.2 header splitter. Okay, you typically only have one header on your motherboard for USB 3.2. And you may need more than one. For example, a component that I want to put in this computer needs an internal USB 3.2. I don't want to run the wire out of the case and use up one of my USB slots, so I can create an internal one with this adapter. Okay, and these are not expensive. The hard part with adapters, honestly, is trying to think of what to call the adapter you're looking for. Now, that's a little bit tricky sometimes because manufacturers call things different things. But if you at least understand what it starts off as and what it needs to end up as, Google will be your best friend. You'll be amazed at how well the algorithm of Google works to find what you're looking for. Also, most of these are available on Amazon. Okay, another type of adapter is a hub. This is a USB 2.0 hub. So it's powered by a SATA connector, and then I connect a USB 2.0 cable to this, and then to the USB 2.0 header on the motherboard. Now, the reason that it's important to use the right kind of a hub is USB needs to individually assign commands to each one of these ports. A splitter would not work properly. Also, because USB does send out power, you need additional power. That's where the SATA plug comes in. So again, because of something that I'm going to be using in this build, I knew that I would use up all of my headers and I would need more. So there's this. And then of course you're going to have some kind of a fan hub, most likely, if you're using any kind of RGB fan. And some of them have both fan power and the RGB power on them. Some have one or the other. It just depends on the type of fans that you've chosen. And then it goes on from there. You can get an adapter for your SATA connections. You can get one, if you really need to, that connects to the Molex connector and adapts over to, say, SATA or some other type of power output. The choices are really endless. At the end of the day, you have to try to plan by thinking about everything you're putting in your computer and make a list of what you think you may need. Do not be surprised if you forget something and it kind of stalls your build. That happens. And over time, you will accumulate a wide assortment of different adapters and cables. Don't throw them out. Hold on to them. You never know when you're going to need that one different type of cable to do something different to your computer. Make you a box and keep them in there. Okay, so one of the tricks that I use for managing my cables on the visible side, and it doesn't just apply to cables, it applies to components, is I use 3M Dual Lock. Dual Lock is a little bit like Velcro, except it's the same on both sides, and it's extremely strong. When you connect it just a little bit, its strength is unbeatable. And thankfully, it unhooks easily when you pull it in the right direction. It's a little bit expensive for a roll, but the roll lasts a very, very long time. 10 feet of it is about $30. And I'll tell you a trick. Clean the surfaces with alcohol, apply the piece that you need to apply, and give it at least an hour. The longer you wait, the better. You want to let that adhesive really bond to the surface well before you put any kind of load on it. That's going to help you out a lot. Another thing that I do is some cables, no matter how hard you try, they just don't look good. If you want black cables and your cable that you have is bright red, well, that doesn't look very good in your build. Well, there's a little trick that I use. Now, some people will use electrical tape. Now, electrical tape is okay for some things. The problem is electrical tape leaves a sticky residue, for one thing. The second thing, and the biggest problem, is electrical tape is actually flammable. It's not a good idea in your computer because if it should catch on fire, it will spread the fire. Instead, there's a better solution. This is called Tessa tape. I'm going to put a link down below where you can get this off Amazon. You can get a single roll and it'll last you a long time. That's the size of a new roll. This is used in the auto industry for a lot of your wires in your car because, number one, it's abrasion resistant. Number two, it is flame retardant. So if flame comes in contact with it, it will actually stop the fire. This is great for high amperage wiring, and I have a background in car stereos, and we learned to use this as a fire stop. We also used it where anytime our wires ran across a sharp metal surface that we couldn't put a grommet or something else on, we would wrap it with Tessa tape. Tessa tape has another very nice quality. It's not shiny like electrical tape. You can put this around a red cable and it will dull it, it will not reflect light, and you almost won't notice it if it's tucked away in the corner of your case. Some cables, they have a black braided cover, but I don't know if you can see that. You can still see the colored wire right there. That's trash ass to me. I don't understand that. But there's a simple solution. Start wrapping your Tessa tape and bring it down over the heat shrink. And now you've not only stopped that wire from moving around in the braid, but you also cover those colored wires and they're not going to stand out. Little tricks like that will go a long way to make your build look cleaner and nicer and make cables not stand out. Because honestly, if we could avoid any cables at all, we would. It would make a cleaner build. But they're inevitable. You cannot escape them right now. So pick you up some Tessa tape. That's going to help you in some really unique situations, and you'll find it to be very helpful. Now, another type of adapter that is rare, but you may come across it, and I mentioned the name of it before, it's called Molex. And you can Google it. It was the name of the company, but it became used as the name of the connector. It's a 4-pin adapter, carries 12 volt and grounds, and these things are not very good because the pins get crooked, they crush easily, and it can cause a lot of problems. They also don't stay together very well sometimes, or the exact opposite. They stay together so well you have to use pliers to pull them apart, and that can do damage to the wiring. They've also been known for the wire to pull out the back end. They were the standard for a lot of years, and they've gotten away from these, but they still come in most power supply kits. I would encourage you not to use these type of connectors if you can avoid it. And the last one I want to show you is kind of related to this 3.2 splitter. It's this one, right? It kind of accomplishes the same thing, but in a different way. So when you're looking for an adapter and you say 3.2 splitter, you are going to come up with two different options, but you have to pay attention to how they connect. This is a female. This is a male. This end plugs into this. And this is the end that would be on your motherboard. You'll see it sticking up. And so your plug from your front I/O panel would look like this. It would be the male, and it plugs into it. Now, I ordered this by mistake, and it was a really easy mistake to make because the picture was not really good, and I was tired, and so I didn't realize that this was the female one. I have no idea what I'm going to use this for. I'll find something one day, but I didn't return it because I know that there's always that one time I said, man, I wish I had that cable. So keep that in mind. Be careful when you're ordering your adapters. All right, so I'm going to clear this mess out of the way, and I want to show you a power supply and go over some really important points on a power supply, and then we're going to jump over on the Hyte and start doing some cable work. Okay, so here we have our power supply. Again, yes, I opened it to make sure everything was intact, but I haven't taken anything out. And what you're looking at is one of the higher end power supplies from EVGA, 1000 watt gold. On power supplies, it's not hard to figure out what size power supply you need. You can add up the TDP, the maximum wattage required of each component, and get some idea. If you come up with a number about, say, 550, don't get a 550 watt power supply. Exceed that. You know, if you need 550, go with an 850. If you need 750, go with a 1000. It's not going to hurt anything to have more power available. But what can happen is if you have too low a wattage power supply, you can have your components shut down. You can wear out the power supply and actually cause a physical damage to it to occur that can do damage to the rest of your computer. I have had it happen to me with a defective power supply that fried an entire computer. And thankfully the retailer made it right because it was a recalled power supply that they failed to remove from their shelf. I got lucky. I don't think people would do that nowadays. I think that you would be out of a lot of money. So get a good brand power supply, get a high rated power supply, And you can always move it to another system. They are not one and done. All right, so when you open up your power supply, you're going to see something very much like this. You're definitely going to have a power cable that goes from the power supply to the wall. Use this power cable. It's heavy duty. If you have, say, a 1250 or higher power supply, I think that they're coming with an even heavier duty cable, and I believe it's the 1500 watt power supplies. They actually have a different plug than this type right here, so that you can't accidentally use this kind on that larger power supply. I think it's the 1500 watt. So use the cable that comes with the power supply. It's a high quality cable. You're going to have your manual. And you know, I always say, read the manual. Do read this manual. Look it over. You may have some Velcro for cable management. You're going to have a whole bunch of cables like this. Now, this power supply came with the ribbon style cables like this. There's a couple of problems. Number one, they're ugly. Okay. Number two, as you can see by that SATA connector, it's basically a right angle. Trying to get it in the view of the camera for you. It's a right angle SATA connector. Well, that works fine if you have a SATA drive that has the end sticking out to where that can connect right to it. But if you're mounting your SATA flush up against the surface like many computers do now, this might not work without putting the connector on the drive in an upward bind. So this may not be a good cable. Now, you might be able to flip your drive over so you could then put the cable on this way, but not necessarily. The second one in the chain is even worse because it's so thick. And you can use 3 devices on that cable with no problem. There's plenty of power. SATA devices pull very, very little power. That's fine. But this is not a good quality cable. Now, you would think, well, why did you get that power supply? Well, because I don't plan to use these cables. Okay, and I'll show you the ones I'm going to use in just a minute. However, you need to pay attention to the kind of cables that come with your power supply. If you're not getting custom cables, you want to make sure you get cables that are going to work for you and that you like the look of, because you are going to see them. EVGA has been putting this tester in with the power supply. And without going into a lot of detail right now, essentially this lets you connect to the 24-pin cable and then connect that to the power supply, and that powers up the power supply so you can use a tester to test the power from each cable to make sure you have the right voltage and that you actually have voltage at all to each wire. And if you know how to use a tester or a multimeter, you can even tell which wire is the ground and so on. That's a nice feature if you know how to use it. Okay, so now another bag of cables. I'm going to open this just so you can see this crazy amount of cables that you get. This is no joke. Here is the 24-pin, and they decided to put braid on this one, except for the part that goes right by your motherboard. It's just all solid black, and it just looks terrible. Okay, if you don't have the budget for custom cables, you know, it's fine. Do what you have to do. These are good quality cables. Don't get me wrong. They're not bad cables. But when you're spending the kind of money that most people do on a computer, don't go 99% of the way. That 1% makes a lot of difference. These make good cables for backups. They also make good cables for areas you're not going to see them on the motherboard side, and you know, you can use them for extensions and other things. So you want to hang on to them by all means, but I'm not going to use these. Now last we're going to get to the power supply. It's not very big. It's actually really small, and it's not because it's a bad power supply. It's because technology has gotten so much better. In years past, this thing would have been at least twice the size for the same wattage. This is a fully modular power supply, which means it doesn't have this big gaggle of wires coming out the back. I can hook up only the wires that I need. That is a great thing to have. It makes for better cable management, easier installation, and honestly, the price has gotten so competitive, I don't see a reason not to use a modular power supply. They do make semi-modular, which means that your 24-pin, your EPS, which powers your CPU, and sometimes at least one PCI cable for your graphics card will be hardwired in, and then the rest are modular. But I prefer to just get a modular power supply. It just makes it a whole lot easier, and it looks so much better. Okay. One last thing before I move on. Here's a bag of screws. Now, in the manual, you're going to see it says use the screws provided with the power supply. Now, some people would be tempted to change these. Let me see if you can see these on the camera. There's 4 of them, and they look like case screws, but they're a little bit different. You're not going to see it on camera, but on the face of the screw, there are teeth. And what those teeth are designed to do is dig into the paint on the case to create a bare metal surface. And why is that important? Well, to be honest, I don't know that it is anymore. I know why it used to be really important. There was a time when computer cases could be made of all sorts of material, and the grounding was not common. So you could end up with a ground loop. You could end up with some strange static discharge issues. So they wanted to make sure that the power supply was grounded to the chassis, and that was their solution. They haven't gotten away from it. Now, I don't have the equipment to actually test for that. So I always tell people, best practice, use these screws. Make sure they're installed tight. And yeah, they're going to take a little paint off of your case. Don't worry about it. You're not going to see it. Don't go using thumb screws. There are some frames that go on your power supply that allow you to quickly remove it using thumb screws, and that's fine, but you're still going to mount that frame using these, and they're going to accomplish the same exact thing. So follow the manual's instructions, use the screws. It's really important. So that covers unboxing the power supply. Now, I mentioned that I was going to use custom cables. So I'm going to pull those out now, and I think you'll quickly understand the reason I chose to go with CableMod cables. They're beautiful. Yeah, they're an extra expense. I'm not going to say they're expensive because I don't think they are. Number one, they're a much better cable. Each one is inspected carefully. They're not just mass produced and thrown in a bin and you get what you get. Believe that they are handmade. I know that their super custom ones definitely are handmade to order. But I ordered these and I don't remember how much they were. I'll put a link down below for their website, but you can actually get these on Amazon now. They're selling them there. And they're about the same price on their website, but you can get some really expensive options on their website. You can easily spend $400 on a set of cables on their website if you get certain types of wrapping. This is the braided wrap, but this is the kind of braid that's not going to fray. So, you know, you can see this is a SATA, and you can already see what I was talking about. See how this will go in nice and straight? Well, for a particular application I'm using it for, that's exactly what I need. I need it to go in straight and not have a bunch of bulk behind it. Okay? And yes, I can daisy chain it to another drive, which I will be doing if this will reach. See, that's the thing. Remember I said there's surprises? Well, there's no way for me to know the exact length and how I was going to do some of my build. So I'm going to have to just see how it works out. Okay? Here is the big 24 pin. That's a lot of wires, and they look kind of crazy, you know, and in some ways, someone would say, well, that kind of looks messy. Yeah, it does look messy, and they have a solution for that. You have cable combs. These cable combs go on the wires, and they separate them out and make them look nice and orderly. And it's a very satisfying feeling when you click the wires in here and see them come together very nice and straight. And they do a really good job. CableMod's stuff is a high quality, so once I clamp these on, they're going to stay put. They're not going to slide up and down loose and not do their job. They're going to stay put. So this is what I'm going to be putting in, and the visual effect is going to be amazing. The quality is going to be fantastic. Now, I could have gone with an extension. I could have used the stock cable and put a fancy looking extension on it that would give the same visual effect on the motherboard side. The problem is that then you have this bulky connection and extra cable on the back side of the case that you've got to cable manage. And like many cases, the Hyte was designed for deliberate building, and it doesn't provide a lot of hiding places for cables. They use that space for your components, not for your cables. Some cases, they give you ample room in the basement area to hide all your cables, and maybe you have a solid side panel that'll help you hide it. But then when it gets bulky, that can be a problem. So I decided to just replace my cables completely and have a much better appearance. Okay, well, let's head over to the computer and let's show you how we're going to start this process. Okay, so here we are. We have our case. I've got the cables that I'm going to need set out. I tried to straighten them out a little bit. That curve in them will work itself out. So you have some choices when you start connecting your cables, and you don't want to be fighting around things. For example, I haven't put my graphics card in yet because I'm going to be turning the case up and down a time or two, and I'm also going to be fighting around it if I put it in, and I just don't need more things in my way. So I'm trying to think about how do I want to approach this. Well, as you can see, I've already put my cables on for these two SSDs. And the reason that I did them off camera is because I had to figure out exactly how I needed to lay the cables so that they looked nice and orderly. And that took some time, and that's the key here. Expect to spend some time doing this and be willing to redo some things and undo and redo some things if you're not happy with the result. Do not let impatience get in the way now. You're too close to the end, and this is the stage where not only are you supplying power to your components, but the visual impact will be substantial if you get in a hurry. So on a side note, when I was hooking up my fans, I was left with a dilemma of having a couple of fans on one hub and the rest on a different hub. And the choice that I ended up making was to get one more fan with the connector that I need so that I can run all my fans off of a single hub. And that was for simplicity's sake, so that when I control my fans with software, I'm only dealing with one software. So even when you're an experienced builder, you will run into situations where you have to make a change because things just worked out a little different than you planned. Be prepared for that. So when it's time to install your cables, what I like to do, is I like to work from the motherboard side and feed my cables through as opposed to connecting them to the power supply and then pushing them through. I'll explain why I do that when I turn the case around, but for right now I'm going to start with the most aggravating cable there is, and that is your EPS cable, which is extended power supply, external power supply. There's a few different arguments on what EPS actually stands for. But suffice to say that most motherboards nowadays have an 8-pin EPS. They may also have an auxiliary supply next to it of 4-pin or 6-pin, or maybe with some of the brand new platforms, you might see dual 8-pin. Now typically the 8-pin is the only one that's required, but if you want to do any overclocking, it needs that secondary supply of power to make sure that the CPU gets all the power it needs. And that is exactly what it powers. It supplies power directly to your CPU. Now I am going to be using both of mine. It has an 8-pin and a 4-pin. And on most decent power supplies and good cable sets, there's going to be a label that helps you understand which end goes to the power supply and which end goes to the component. Not only is that important because it usually won't fit backwards, but some cables actually are designed to where they can fit either way. You've got to be very careful using those cables because sometimes the voltages are different. The cables can do a twist mid-line that you don't see. There's different things that can happen. You want to make sure the right end is connected to the right part. So to start with, I'm going to work on my 8-pin EPS. Now this one is dedicated, and they even already put the cable combs on it. And you can see it says EPS, and on this end it says PSU. So it clearly tells me which end goes where. The next thing I'm going to look for is where are the locks on the connectors, on the headers, because these have a push tab that locks down over it. Well, I can see that on my motherboard they're on the top. So that means that when I connect this cable, it's going to connect this way and then bend over like this. So you can see that having a nice looking cable is an advantage because a lot of it will be exposed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my cable just as I've got it now, and I'm going to actually feed the cable over the top and through the pass-through on the top side if there's room. Well, what do you do if there's not room? Well, you have to do something different. These are both the same thickness, and yet I can't pass this through. So what's the next choice? You got it. I have to loosen my radiator mount on the top. Would it have made sense for me to install this cable before I put the radiator in? Well, if I had realized that, maybe, but then I would be fighting with the cable the entire time. So you have to kind of choose which aggravation do you want. These are the things that if you've never built in a case before, you may run into it. And don't get mad. Don't get frustrated. Just see it as one of those things that, you know, is just a necessary part of the process. So again, I'm looking at the orientation of my plug. Okay, I see how it needs to go. And I'm just going to lift up. And I'm going to pass the power supply end through. And yes, it will twist and turn and do all kinds of things. That's okay. And once you get these lined up, they're going to just drop in place and click. Just like that. I heard a very audible click. That's what I was looking for. Then I'll just pull my wire. And I have to be very mindful. I don't want this wire to get caught in that fan. So I have to look at which way do I need it to bend to. And I'm going to try to bend it off to the left so that I know it's not hitting the fan. Okay, now I'm not done with that. I'm going to leave it there for now. I'm going to revisit that once I put the second wire in. So I have a 4-pin secondary EPS. Now most power supplies are going to come with a split cable just like this one. It isn't labeled, but that is what it's meant to be because you have 2 4-pins. Now these pins are keyed. And when I say keyed, they're not all the same shape, and I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but some are square and some are shaped like a barn. So when you look at your header, you have to try to envision which way that plug is going to connect and then see where's your square. Okay, I can see by that this is not the correct plug because this has a square at the top of where the tab is, and I need it to have an upside down barn. Well, look at this one. That has an upside down barn. So I know this one goes here and click. It went right in with no problem. So now I'm going to push this cable through and see it has all this extra length here. Now if I had gone online and custom ordered exactly the cables that I knew I needed for a greater cost, I could have eliminated this extra cabling. So why didn't I do that? Well, because a lot of this build was not completely decided, and I ordered some things in a different sequence than I normally would, and the result of that is I needed it to be a flexible part. I can also take these cables and I can use them in another build if I ever feel like I want to, and I may need something completely different then. So what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of working with these cables to get the twist out. Because I had to flip them over, it put a twist in. And this is where a lot of people get frustrated and they get a little agitated. You just have to be very patient. Just take it one step at a time. Don't let it overwhelm you. And now is where I start to pay a little bit of attention to the appearance. Okay, so now these cables are naturally wanting to bend off to the right, but I can see that my fan is hitting that, and that's not good. So how am I going to deal with that? Well, we have to play with it. That's where a little bit of patience goes a long way. And this is generally the part of a video where a builder would stop filming because they would be getting aggravated because, to be honest, this is a little bit aggravating. Absolutely no way to know that this was going to become an issue. Okay, can you see that? I've managed to get them off to the left, and when I turn the fan, Nothing. It's not rubbing. It's not even close to rubbing. So I just need to arrange the wires a little bit neater because I'm very meticulous about this. And I believe that just a few extra moments of my time is going to result in a much better appearance overall. And when you bend these, you're not going to hurt them. I promise you. Those tabs are so strong. If you damage your motherboard doing this, that wasn't a good motherboard, and you needed to go ahead and damage it now. You don't want it to suddenly decide it's going to be weak after your build is complete. And I know my hand is in the way a lot here. What I'm doing is I'm pushing down on the curve of the cable to help shape them and keep them in a form that I know they're not going to stand up and hit that fan down the line, because it's going to be a little while before I'm ready to do my cable management. You know, that's in another video, and I don't want to have any more trouble out of this. It's way up here in the corner where few people ever think about, and it can be a source of problem. So when I go to cable manage, I'm going to have to make sure that I take a lot of time and I anchor this cable down really strong with zip ties. I don't ever want it to move. I don't want it to have a chance to flex upward. See, I can hear it's hitting because there's nothing pulling down on it right now. But it will work where it's at. Now that's the only thick cable that I need to install through there. So I can go ahead and tighten my radiator back down, and I shouldn't have to move it again. Now if I do, well, then I'll deal with it. What I definitely don't want is I don't want to leave this radiator unsecured because while I start moving other things around, I could have it flopping and moving, and I don't want that. And that is generally the hardest set of cables to get sorted. This one is being a little bit more so than normal, but by playing with it, I was able to see that yes, I can get it to bend the way I want it. So when I do my cable management, I'll be able to achieve the result that I want. Now what would I do if I just couldn't make it work? Well, that's a story for another build. Right now it's not even touching the fan, so that's great. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is I want to do my 24 pin. Now, one thing you got to be very careful of as you start adding these cables and you're putting them out the back end of the computer, if you have a turntable, it's better. But if you're turning your case and you're on a narrow table, you don't want your cables to catch on the edge of the table because it can jerk your entire computer down. See, all this cable that I have to deal with here is a recipe for disaster. So for the time being, just tuck it anywhere that you can to keep it from catching on something. I know it looks like a mess right now, but we're going to straighten that out. We just don't want one of these connectors catching on the edge and doing harm. So again, just like with the EPS, I'm going to look at how my header is oriented, and then I'm going to install my cable accordingly. So I can see, again, the tab needs to connect onto this lock tooth. I don't know what you'd call it, a catch. So when you install it, you want to line it up. It should push in nice and smooth. You shouldn't have to force this in. If you do, you're doing it backwards. And then push it straight in until you hear a slight click. It won't be real loud, but you'll know because you'll see that the tab is all the way down. If you give that a gentle tug, you can actually move the whole motherboard. And again, this has combs already installed. So I'm just going to spread these out some so I can bend it. Now in this case, there are these grommets on the pass-throughs. Now these grommets are known to pop out and they can be kind of a pain to put back in. So I'm going to be kind of careful. I don't want to have to fight with them. So I'm just going to take my time. I'm going to pass this through where it lines up best. On your case and with your motherboard, your hole to pass the cables through may actually be up a little higher or a little lower to where your cables have to go at an angle like this or upward like this. That's okay. It's not going to hurt anything. I'm lucky that mine can go straight through. I'm just going to feed them through. Now, what I want to watch for is what kind of a bend does this cable naturally want to have in it. You know, I don't want these cable combs to prevent it from curling right here, but I don't want it to curl too much either. I don't want it to be at a 90-degree angle. You can buy an adapter that plugs into the 24-pin header and is at a 90-degree angle so that your plug comes in this way instead of this way. I deliberately didn't get that because I bought these nice cables, and by installing it this way, it's going to expose more of the cable. If you have the Lee & Lee streamer, which is the RGB cable, you definitely wouldn't want to use that because you would be hiding a lot of your cable. So it comes down to aesthetics, what's practical, and just what makes the most sense. Now I can see by this flex on the header that I'm almost at the limit of of how much I can bend this. I don't want to bend that so much that I damage my motherboard. You know, it's going to take a natural form of its own as it sits here. You know, in a few days I might be able to come and give that a little more of an arc to it, but for right now that looks really good. So now I just adjust these cable combs and it's a nice clean look. And I haven't even secured it with zip ties, and it looks pretty nice just like that. So the two main cables are installed. So now the next ones that I would want to install would be for my graphics card. Now my graphics card has two 8-pin headers, and I've identified the proper cables because it says PCI on one end, on the other end, PSU, power supply unit. Also, again, there's pre-installed combs, which is generally going to point you to the pretty end, the part that you're going to see. Now, again, I'm not putting my graphics card in now, but I can go ahead and I can run these cables. Now, for those of you that are using the Hyte Y60, I need to point something out right now. I had mentioned that I had contacted the engineers at Hyte and asked a few questions. One of the questions that I had was, what is this cutout in the basement for? Incidentally, that's metal. My screwdriver is sticking to it. I just now discovered that. So again, high quality. Well, I asked him, I said, why is that cut out? Because it just so happens to be right over the edge of where the fan would throw out air. And I said, is that so the air can blow up into the bottom of the graphics card? Well, surprisingly, they said no. They put that there to make running cables a little bit easier. And you can see that there's a notch right here that, although it's shaped like the rest of the slots, that is so you can run a zip tie through. Now, I would not recommend running heavy cables like your graphics card cables right over the top of your fan. That's going to interfere with airflow, and it's probably not a great idea. I don't know that it would actually hurt anything, but I would be afraid of the potential for the cable to touch the fan or to block some airflow. So, I'm going to look at this a little bit differently and say, well, how should I run these cables? Well, this other pass-through goes very low on the motherboard. So I know that I can run these cables down there. And then depending on whether I need to rotate them for my graphics card or not, I don't remember which side the catch is on for the locking tab. I can twist these around either way, it doesn't matter. And then essentially they're going to be together like this on top of the graphics card. Okay, and it's a pretty beefy graphics card, so they're going to be up here pretty high. So that gives you an idea. They're in place, so I'm just going to drop them down, and I am going to put them in that slot for now. Why am I doing that? Well, because I don't want them flopping around everywhere. Okay, so those are your primary power cables on the motherboard side. Now, the next things that you're going to need to deal with, do you have any solid state drives like I do that you need to plug in? Do you have any other kind of accessories that it would be easiest to go ahead and install them now as opposed to later? Well, that depends. For me, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run some of this wire now to get it out of the way, but that's going to be the extent of it, because the first thing that I want to cable manage is going to be these primary power supply wires and get them secured, because I shouldn't be bothering those too much. I'm more likely to have to unhook and remove a solid state drive wire or a fan wire or an accessory wire. Your power supply wires, they should not have to be bothered, so you can connect, or you can secure those with zip ties and forget about them. Okay, so this is a data cable for my solid state drive. The other solid state drive, I've already run the cables to where they need to go. And these cables simply come out straight off the back. And I'm going to tuck them down in behind the bottom of the motherboard there. And you've got some exposed USB 2.0 header pins. You don't want to catch those with your cable and bend them and break them. So take your time. Again, don't worry about, are you crossing another cable on the other side? That'll be fixed when we get to that side. This is a CableMod's SATA cable, and it is extremely stiff and unforgiving. It does not want to bend at all. The round style are probably the easiest to work with. These are going to be hidden by the graphics card, so I'm not worried at all about these cables. I will deal with them during cable management, because just like installing the cables, I'm going to start at the front and make sure everything looks nice on the front side, makes sense, doesn't interfere, everything is orderly, and then I'll move to the back side. Okay, so now these wires are for the AIO pump and display. I don't want to forget about these. And you can see this has a USB 2.0 header, and this has a micro USB plug, and this plugs into the motherboard, this plugs into the hub. So no, I'm not going to just run this down here to the motherboard and then tuck all this cable down. No, I'm going to run this up and over and behind and back under if it will let me. It should. And if it doesn't feel like it, I'll have to find another solution for it. I think when they make a lot of this stuff, they pretty well have an idea of the way people are going to install things. And you can generally tell because they give you a really long wire, or if you don't need a long wire, they give you a shorter wire, and it'll kind of lead you in the right direction. That's not always true. I wish it were. Just take your time on this part. Make sure that you're not running your wires across anything that's going to be a problem. See, this is my CPU fan header at the top that I'm running the wire next to. This back fan will be connected to that header so that I don't have the alarm issue and I don't have to disable it. I don't like disabling safety features if I can avoid it, and I can easily avoid it. Okay, so now just from that, look at how much nicer that looks. That was a really simple process. And I had to fidget around, and you saw that I struggled a little bit, and I had to figure it out as I went along. I've never built in this case before. I didn't practice this ahead of time because I wanted you to see on camera what it's like the first time when you're dealing with something unfamiliar. Okay, so now it's time to rotate the case. And before I do, again, I'm going to look and make sure I'm not going to catch my wires on anything. And if you thought that was a mess, look at this. And this isn't even including the front I/O panel. This isn't including some of the other things I have yet to add to the system. So it's going to get a lot busier back here. But I'm not going to wait until then to start cable management. I'll begin cable management very soon because I need to get all these heavy power supply wires secure and out of my way. Then it makes it easier to deal with fan wires and other things and do things in a sensible order. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do, I want to install my power supply. Now, why do I want to do that? Well, because I don't want to cable route or cable manage any cables without that power supply in, because I run the risk of routing a cable in an area that's going to be hit or touched by the power supply. I don't want to do that. This is the ideal time to go ahead and do it. Now, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and remove these two drive trays because they are in my way, and I know that I can run some cables behind them. So what I like to do with the wires I'm not dealing with, flip them over the top. You can even take a piece of Velcro and secure it temporarily. You can use zip ties if you have a bunch, but you're just going to have to cut it loose. So just move all these out of the way because you don't need to deal with them right now. So see, I'm fishing all these wires out from underneath other things that they went under. And I'm just trying to see how can I get them out of my way. Now, I don't want these wires buried behind these other wires. So I have to make sure I don't create extra work for myself later. So some wires you just have to run off to the side. The important thing is you get them out of your way so that you can work a lot more effectively. And then you can more clearly see what you're dealing with. This is the SATA wire from my 2 SSDs that I ran earlier. And you can see I still have 2 usable plugs on it. That's completely fine. You can use those, and I'm going to use those because I don't want to add another wire when I have 2 perfectly good connections there. Okay, so now for the power supply. Power supplies have a fan, and these fans are pretty large, and they are intake fans. Looking at it, you would think that it blows the air out, and it would make sense logically that, oh, it's going to pull in cool air and blow out hot air. That's not actually how they work. They work the other way around. They pull in cool air from here and blow out hot air from here. So it's the same idea, but it matters in how you install it because I would not want to put this fan up against this back. That would cause it to not be able to draw in any cool air, and it would overheat and it would shut down. If I were mounting this to the bottom, ideally I would want it mounted this way. However, if it's a bottom mount, you can mount it upright like this. The only concern is if you have a vertically mounted graphics card, you're going to be pulling hot air from the graphics card down into your power supply. Now, I have a computer that I have that situation with, and I've not had a problem with my power supply yet. It doesn't even get over room temperature. Again, my power supply is overrated for the system, so it's not working very hard. It has a little headroom on the temperature before there's a problem. So having a bigger power supply is good for a lot of reasons. Okay, on these modern power supplies, you're going to have an I/O switch, input-output. It's on and off. You're also going to have an eco switch. It's economy mode. It will actually turn the fan off. I don't know why you would want to do that. It's going to do that on its own anyway. I think that it also goes into a lower power output state when the system is maybe at idle. I've read a lot of problems with people having that turned on. I leave it off. So you use it how you feel is best. Now, the last situation, not so common anymore, but if you're working on a pre-built and you're rebuilding it or upgrading it, you may have a top-mounted power supply. And unfortunately, it's probably not going to top mount and let you have the fan pointing up and pulling air in. It's more likely going to be top mounted in this configuration, whether it's facing this way or this way. It's going to basically be pulling air from inside the case. That will work, but unfortunately hot air accumulates at the top, and that's another time when you definitely want a quality power supply. On this case, it mounts at the bottom sideways, and there's a mesh side panel, so this configuration is going to be best. Now, I'm not going to just slap it in there and then start hooking up cables. No, I want to look and see which way should I do it. Some power supplies you have to insert like a cartridge from the end. Some have a frame that attaches first to the power supply, and then you insert it, and then you have thumb screws on that frame. And then what it looks to me like is I should insert it from this way and set it on these shelves. Did I read the manual? Yeah, I did. I just don't remember what it said. You guys have to understand that I go at least a week in between building so that I can film every step along the way, and I do forget some things. I have other things going on. So I'm going to just do a test fit and see how this goes. And look at that. No screws. Hyte built this case so well that they thought about little details like that. Now, I could go ahead and screw it down and then start connecting my cables, or I can hold it in my hand and I can start connecting my cables, and then I can insert it. Now, which way is best? Well, that's up to you. So when you're installing your cables, there are certain ports on here that you need to pay attention to. Okay, this periph, that refers to peripheral. I do have a Molex cable that I can connect here, and that applies to both of these plugs. Correction, that applies to this plug. This is part of the motherboard plug. And then you have your EPS connections. Then you start with your VGA, which are your graphics card plugs. Now this one has 5 different ones. Now they're not all for your graphics card. These are also PCI Express connections for, I don't know, maybe you have some kind of a PCI card that needs power. You can connect it here and run that cable to it. That's getting really uncommon, but what is still common are the SATA ports, and they're 6-pin, and they go to this flat style plug. Okay, so I'm going to start with my motherboard and then go to my CPU, because those are the most important right now. I want to make sure I get those hooked up.
Ten years later.
Okay, welcome back. As you can see, some things have happened in this computer. So if you've watched my other videos, you know that I went through a long respiratory illness. And I still do have some, recovery to do. You'll hear me clear my throat a time or two. Just bear with me. I apologize for that. But I am getting better. So what has happened since the last time I filmed is I made the decision off camera to make a few changes. So the first thing I want to point out is the way that I've cable managed my main power cables. And the reason I went ahead and did this is I realized that your motherboard, your power supply, your fans, and especially your case are going to determine how you go about doing this. And while I could show you how I did this, honestly, it would be boring and it would amount to a fast forward montage that I don't want to do, except when I do the actual cable management, which will be the next video. What I want to point out here, this is what you want to accomplish. Now I want to point out a few details. You can see that I used very heavy zip ties, and that's because these are anchored permanently. And I say permanently because I should not have to bother my EPS and my 24-pin cables. Those should be pretty well left alone from now on unless I have a major problem. The reason I use heavy zip ties is that allows me to secure these very tight, very solid. And now when I want to secure another cable, for example, these fan wires. So let's say I want to secure these over here like this and whatnot. I can actually run a lightweight zip tie around the wire bundle and a wire around the fan wires, and it will hold them perfectly fine. Because as great as the Y60 is, no case can ever have as many anchor points as you may need for your particular build. I can't stress enough that every build combination changes some of these things. Some to a minor degree that you really don't care about, and some to a major degree. So, without sounding like I'm nitpicking, because I'm not, I ran into that situation and I had to get a little creative, and you will as well. But see, this is very orderly. I have everything bundled nicely. It's not pulling on wires in a way that's bad for the plug, and everything is pushed up against the case wall, and it's out of the way. I have a lot of depth I can come out with wires and different things. So this is what you're going for. You want these cables to be as secure and out of your way as possible. Now, with that said, let's go back to the front of the case. Again, remember, keep up with all these crazy wires. Don't let them just drag as you rotate your case around. You don't want to damage anything. You're going to also notice that I removed my CableMod SATA wire, which was this, and it looks nice. The reason I went ahead and removed it and went with a more traditional style is because I didn't like the way the cable was standing up. No matter which way I turned it and folded it, it was just not looking the way that I want it to look. These wires are going to be hidden by my graphics card because it's vertically mounted and it's going to come back to about here. So it's not really going to be a big deal. Remember, I said that you're going to have unexpected things and you're going to have surprises. You're going to have to be flexible. That applied to me as well. I had to shelve the idea of using all those nice looking cables in a way that they're visible and make some compromises. Just like with my SATA cables. Now this is a CableMod SATA cable on top. The one underneath it is a 90-degree cable that I picked up. I don't remember the brand, but it's a good brand. I've never had a problem with them. Again, I had to make a compromise. It's a compromise I can live with. At this point, to be honest, the only thing that I'm actually bothered about is the fact that my AIO hoses are a little too short. If they were a little longer, I could run them just underneath my RAM. But because of the length of them, they're actually covering some of the LEDs on my Dominator RAM. And I looked at maybe rotating the pump head, and I realized that's not going to solve the problem at all. I even considered flipping the entire AIO around, but then I realized that my hoses would most likely interfere with this fan and possibly a heat sink. So I thought, it's okay. The color scheme of light that I'm going to be using is going to be either white or red, depending on the mood I'm in. I don't think it's going to be a big deal. I'm not going to have my Dominator RAM doing a lot of effects like I would normally. This particular build is different. So, in addition, you can see my fancy SSDs. These have infinity mirrors on top, and they're beautiful. They are absolutely for appearance only. That I have 4 terabytes of storage in NVMe's, plus another 2 terabytes here. I don't need all that. It's just for looks. I wanted to show you how you can get a lot of different things into a computer. Even though you may start running out of space, you just have to be a little creative. Another thing I want to point out again, as I've mentioned in the comments, I know that a lot of the visible parts of these fans is totally hidden with this case. I'm fully aware of that. I originally wasn't going to use these fans. When I conceived the idea of this case, I was going to use Corsair QL fans. But then I shifted directions and I was not thinking about all the ways that these fans are going to be blocked. It was kind of impossible because the fans were purchased at a different time than other components. And so, it's one of the reasons I caution people, try to buy everything at one time. That way you can return anything that's not working right. And you have a better idea of how things are going to look together. If you buy a case and then you buy a motherboard and a few weeks later you buy some fans, you may start to forget some little details and some little things. So just take that under advisement. I'm still very happy with the way this is turning out. I have no complaints about it at all. Again, I love this case. It's probably the best case I've ever built in, and for a number of reasons. Okay, so going back to the rear, what you can see now are my front I/O panel wires are tucked here, and I have my fan wires. I have some wires up here. Those will be dealt with in my cable management. These wires are of no consequence. They're long enough that I can do pretty much anything I want with them. I can get extensions. That's the other thing you need to realize. Your ARGB and certainly your PWMs, there are extensions available on Amazon for these. It may require you to wait a day or two to finish your build, but one thing you don't want to do is don't run wires across at an angle like this. It does not look good. You want to try to keep things in straight lines if you possibly can. Am I going to be able to do that? I think so. I think I will, because I plan to mount my hub where this SSD tray is. But I can't see that far ahead right now. I have to wait until I get into that. So that's pretty much all that has happened since the last time I filmed. The power supply is mounted, as you can see. And yes, I used the proper screws, and one of them gave me a little bit of trouble. And the reason it did is because there's powder coat and paint on surfaces. Sometimes the screws can be aggravating. So that's where we're at, and this looks really good. If you can accomplish getting your main power wires in a way that is organized, functional, and secure, then you're doing good. The only thing that's missing from here are obviously my two 8-pin wires for my graphics card. Now, earlier in the video, I mentioned how many VGA or PCI ports there are on this power supply. I actually bought this power supply before we knew that the 40 series GeForce cards from NVIDIA would have a 4 8-pin adapter cable. This is a new gen power supply. So now, since all that has happened, I understand why there are 5 PCI outputs on this power supply. At the time, I thought it was very strange, but EVGA knew something we didn't know at the time when I bought that. So I wanted to explain that so that we're all on the same page. And now it's time for a follow-up. Okay, so once again, the video went a little longer than I expected. I hope that it was at least informative, and I hope that it cleared up some things concerning running your cables, your power wires, at least the main power wires for now. Now, when you are doing this, just keep in mind, don't be in a hurry. Be prepared to have to maybe loosen something, I've even heard of people having to remove their motherboard because of one reason or another. When you purchase your case and you're thinking about what size case you want, you need to be thinking about the size of your motherboard. It's very important that they are a good match. Many cases will say they support micro ATX, ATX, and even eATX, extended ATX. That is a big motherboard. It may physically fit in the case. That doesn't mean that it's going to be a good fit. It doesn't mean that it won't cause you some problems. At the same time, if you have a very large case and you put a micro ATX board in, you could run into the exact opposite problem where you've got short cables that just can't quite reach the motherboard for some reason. And you have to get extensions because the motherboard is so much smaller. So keep that in mind as you are pairing up your motherboard and your case. There's a lot of research that goes into building a computer. And I know it can be overwhelming. Some people just choose to get a pre-built computer. I can't discourage that enough. You will regret it in some way at some point. The work that you put into this planning and this process of learning and building is going to reap you rewards for years to come because you're going to be a smarter consumer. And if you do choose to get a pre-built, and we've all been there, let's be honest, you're at least going to know what quality looks like. You're going to know what features you need to have because you built a computer one time and you remember the things that mattered the most to you. So it's great knowledge to have. And there are times, honestly, you can save a lot of money with a pre-built on, after Thanksgiving sales, Cyber Monday, things like that. I've done it myself. But I digress. The cabling portion of the computer can be one of the most frustrating because there are so many unknowns. There are a lot of variables. And with those variables come a lot of choices and compromises that have to be made. I encourage you to approach it with the understanding I may have to change some things, or I may have to wait for some cables to come in that I need to make this look as good as I possibly can. So right in front of me, I have some of the adapters and different things I'm going to have to use in my case, possibly. Also, I wanted to point out, these are the removed zip ties just from me running my power wires where I zip tied it. I didn't like the way it was. I needed to move it. I cut the zip tie, had to put another zip tie just from that little bit. Okay. I wanted to show you that so you understand why I have this entire huge box of zip ties of different sizes and lengths and widths. So I use the really heavy duty ones for my main wires. But the 3mm, these little skinny guys, that's what I'm going to use for the rest of my cable management because they're very small. They're skinny. They fit in tight places. They're very cheap. Price-wise, these are actually a good quality zip tie, and they don't stand out as much. I'm also going to be using Velcro in some places when I do the cable management, and that's the next video. So in the next video, I'm going to do something you haven't seen me do really, and that is I'm going to do a fast forward montage. I'm going to start off like I always do with, an introduction where I go over the scope of the video and what I hope to achieve. I'm going to show you again some of the tips. I'm going to show you some of the tools that I use and give you some tips to help you more easily deal with the rat's nest of cables you probably are going to end up with and how to keep from getting confused and frustrated. And then I'm going to just demonstrate a few techniques on how to run your cables. And then I'm going to very much fast forward the process of me cable managing the Hyte Y60. I expect to spend 3 to 4 hours doing it. I'm going to squeeze that down to just, a few minutes. So I don't normally like to do that, but I know you don't want to watch me cable manage, and you don't need to, because the way that I cable manage this case is probably going to be very different from the way you have to do yours, unless you're doing the same components in the same case, and you still will have a different approach, and it's okay. You don't have to do everything exactly as I do. Whatever your accepted level of quality is up to you. I happen to be very particular about cable management. If you aren't, that's okay, and I won't judge you for it. Like I've said before, the only criticism I would give is if someone does something that's dangerous or likely to lead to a damage situation. Otherwise, everyone has a different idea of what quality looks like, and I leave that up to you, but I'm going to at least show you how I do it. So we're winding this down, and I'm going to give you a teaser. I am going to do a how-to video of a component that is unique to the Hyte Y60 that a lot of people have asked me, would I be willing to do it? And I finally said, yeah, I will, because I haven't seen a video done step by step in great detail like I do. And I think a lot of people would like that. Now, if you know what I'm talking about, shh, don't spoil it. After the cable management video, I'm going to be showing the computer start up, and then the next video after that will be the secret special video. So I want you to stick around. If you haven't, please consider subscribing. Hit the notification bell so you know when another video drops, and leave me a comment. And please, guys, get on the Discord. There's some really cool people on there, and it's the best way to get me if you need help immediately. I've actually helped a few people build their PCs the first time, and first time they hit the power button, they got a post. One subscriber ran into a couple of issues because his motherboard needed to be flashed for his new CPU, and that happens. There's always a little chance that something might not go exactly as planned, but it's not a major deal. He got past it, and he's got a great computer. So by all means, get involved. This channel is for you, and I'm so glad that you're here. And I thank you for joining me in Gibby's World of Tech.